On the broadcast tonight, rocky road ahead. President Park's nominee for chief prosecutor has a string of demanding tasks ahead of him, including uniting a divided prosecution and wrapping up a sensitive probe into the intelligence agency's alleged meddling in last year's presidential election. Is the Korean economy on firm path to recovery? The Korean government revises up the growth forecast for this year to nearly 3%. How can we achieve this goal, and what are some obstacles that stand in the way? We have an analysis. And China and Japan are walking a tightrope over the disputed islands in the East China Sea as Beijing keeps up the pressure, sending coast guards to the area following its weekend mention of war after Tokyo reportedly ready to down its drones. This is Early Edition at 6. It is 5 a.m. in Washington, 10 in Berlin, and 6 on a Monday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. We start with a promise made public today that we'd like to see kept throughout.
Korean Prime Minister Chung Hong-won made his first special statement to the nation earlier this Monday, vowing to get to the root of the scandal surrounding last year's presidential election.
The Prime Minister also called for a concerted effort by the government and lawmakers for the early passage of legislation aimed at stimulating the economy. Our Hwang Sung-hee starts us off.
In his first special statement to the nation on Monday, Prime Minister Chung Hong-won said President Park Geun-hye did not receive the assistance of the National Intelligence Service during last year's presidential election.
The president did not receive any help from the National Intelligence Service, and she has made it clear from the start that she will take whatever actions are necessary to uncover the truth.
Lawmakers have been wrangling over suspicions the spy agency launched an online smear campaign ahead of last year's close election to sway public opinion in favor of then presidential candidate Park. The Prime Minister also touched on the economy, which has recently shown signs of recovery. The economy has expanded for 2 consecutive quarters, and the number of new workers has been hovering at 400,000 for the second straight month. Saying that now is the time to focus on economic recovery, the Prime Minister called for cooperation between the government and lawmakers.
The National Assembly and the government must work together for a swift passage of pending legislation aimed at stimulating the economy and improving the lives of the people.
Prime Minister Chung said the government will take seriously the issues raised during an ongoing parliamentary audit and come up with practical solutions to the problems. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has tapped Kim Jin-tae, former deputy chief of the Supreme Prosecutor's Office, as the nation's new Prosecutor General. As our Kim Hyun-ji reports, the new Prosecutor Chief will have his hands full if and when he's confirmed.
Prosecutor General nominee Kim Jin-tae is walking into an organization in crisis. But it's not the first time. He was brought in to lead the agency last year after its chief resigned in disgrace over a series of corruption and sex scandals involving a number of prosecutors, and several failed attempts to reform the organization. As acting Prosecutor General, Kim moved quickly to restore the organization's tarnished image. Now, Kim has been given a second chance to lead the office, which is again in disarray. His predecessor, Choi Dong-wook, resigned a month ago amid allegations that he fathered a child out of wedlock. The divisions within the prosecution widened last week after a televised dispute between Yoon Sung-yeol, the lead prosecutor who spearheaded a probe into the spy agency's alleged meddling in last year's presidential election, and his superior, Cho Young-gon. Yoon claimed that his probe into the spy agency was undermined amid external pressure, while Cho said that Yoon had failed to follow proper procedure in his handling of the case. The Prosecutor General nominee is facing the task of cleaning up the prosecution and mitigating an internal strife over the spy agency controversy. The main opposition Democratic Party questioned President Park's choice because of Kim's ties to Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun. It claimed that Kim's nomination is part of the Presidential Office of 청와대's plan to take control of the prosecution.
The prosecution has the power to probe the National Intelligence Service, but it is as if the NIS is investigating the prosecution now. The prosecution must clear people's suspicions into the NIS scandal.
But the ruling Saenuri Party urged the opposition party to focus on pending bills.
The Democratic Party must shift its focus away from the spy agency scandal and work with the ruling party to promptly pass bills aimed at reviving the economy.
The confirmation hearing for the Prosecutor General nominee will be held at the National Assembly next month, and it is sure to revolve around the question of whether Kim can ensure the prosecution's neutrality in the face of the investigation into the spy agency. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Tension between Japan and China is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The two nations are provoking each other through increasingly military means. The Chinese government even used the term act of war in response to Tokyo's approval of a plan to shoot down any foreign drones that refuses to leave its airspace. Our Jin-ju has this story.
The territorial dispute between China and Japan is taking on an increasingly militaristic tone. The Japan Self-Defense Forces held a military review near Tokyo on Sunday, featuring some 4,000 troops and hundreds of armored vehicles and fighter jets. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe attended the ceremony and emphasized the importance of a strong self-defense forces.
Security threats against Japan are becoming real, including the threat posed by North Korea's ballistic missiles.
So while it may seem North Korea is the reason behind Japan's push to strengthen its military capability, watchers say Abe's comments are actually aimed at China. Abe reiterated that he will exercise the right to collective self-defense, even if it means a review of the government's constitutional interpretation. On Saturday, the Chinese government angrily responded to a Japanese media report which said Abe had approved a plan to shoot down any foreign drones that ignored warnings to leave Japanese airspace.
If Japan does what it said and resorts to enforcement measures like shooting down aircraft, that is a serious provocation to us. It is an act of war. We will surely undertake decisive decision to strike back.
In protest against Tokyo's latest moves, China sent 4 military jets to waters near Okinawa for 3 straight days from Friday to Sunday. Japan scrambled fighter jets in response. Tensions between the two nations are expected to escalate further over the next couple of weeks, as China is currently conducting its largest ever naval exercise in the Western Pacific. Jin-ju, Arirang News.
Seoul, on its part, has not weighed in on the tensions between Beijing and Tokyo. But the foreign ministry did reiterate a stance it first made back in 1997 that Tokyo will need Seoul's consent should it want to engage its self-defense forces on the Korean peninsula. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
South Korea has voiced concern that Tokyo could expand its military presence to the Korean peninsula without prior approval from Seoul in case of a contingency involving North Korea. The South Korean constitution defines North Korea as its territory, while Japan views it as a separate sovereign state. With that as a foundation, Seoul has maintained its stance towards Tokyo that the Japanese government must ask for Seoul's permission should it seek to exercise its self-defense forces on the peninsula. This statement was first made back in 1997, following a joint declaration on security signed by Tokyo and Washington in 1996. The two countries agreed to achieve a more peaceful and stable security environment in the Asia-Pacific region through a joint effort. Korea's foreign ministry also at that time told the American and Japanese ambassadors to Seoul that any action or move that could affect the sovereignty or safety of Korea must be discussed beforehand between Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Korea's defense ministry also banned Japan's self-defense forces from conducting any military drills on the Korean peninsula. The South Korean government has reportedly asked Washington this time around to make it clear to Japan that it needs approval from Seoul on issues related to its sovereignty and the Korean peninsula. 송지선, Arirang News.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life.
Plans to visit expert.
Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by... Now, South Korea's plans to buy an improved version of the U.S. Patriot missiles are reflected in next year's budget. Some $404 million have been earmarked to purchase 112 anti-tactical ballistic missiles, relevant gear parts, and training aids from the United States. The Patriot missiles are an upgraded version of the Patriot Advanced Capability 2 or PAC-2 missiles currently used by the South Korean military. The move is designed to beef up Korea's air defense system amid increasing missile threats from North Korea. The purchase plan still needs to be approved by the U.S. Congress. Korea and China have agreed to work together to combat illegal fishing starting next year. Seoul's Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries said Monday that the two countries have agreed to run a joint patrol ship 5 to 6 times a year during the high fishing season. They will also set up checkpoints in fishing areas shared by both countries in which boats will be checked for the amount of fish they have caught. Now, the two countries will also set up an automatic identification system that allows Korean authorities to identify and locate Chinese fishing boats from a distance. Seoul and Beijing renew their fisheries agreements every year, but Korea continues to struggle with Chinese boats fishing illegally in Korean waters.
New claims are emerging over the extent to which U.S. intelligence agencies have been listening in on German Chancellor Angela Merkel's mobile phone conversations. This time, sources say U.S. President Barack Obama was personally informed 3 years ago of the phone tapping against Merkel. Our Hwang Sung-hee has the story.
In yet another bombshell in the widening U.S. bugging scandal, German newspaper Bild am Sonntag quotes U.S. intelligence sources as saying that National Security Agency Chief Keith Alexander briefed President Barack Obama on the operation against Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2010 and that Obama agreed to let it continue. It was reported last week that Obama had told Merkel over the phone that he had not been aware of the bugging. The Weekly went on to say that leaked NSA documents show Merkel's phone has appeared on a list of spying targets since 2002. These new revelations are sure to stir up more controversy, even though the NSA has denied the newspaper's claims. Germany and Brazil, another alleged target of the NSA, are working on a United Nations resolution on protecting privacy of electronic communications. Diplomats from the two countries, with a coalition of other nations, including France, Sweden, Norway, and Austria, are leading efforts to draft the resolution and put it to the full General Assembly in late November. British Prime Minister David Cameron broke ranks with other European countries by siding with the US and criticizing former NSA contractor Edward Snowden and unnamed newspapers for helping Britain's enemies.
Is what Snowden is doing, and to an extent what the newspapers are doing in helping him doing what he's doing, is frankly signaling to people who mean to do us harm how to evade and avoid intelligence and surveillance and other techniques.
Meanwhile, Korea wants to know whether any Korean presidents were among the 35 world leaders who had their phone calls allegedly tapped in 2006 after Glenn Greenwald, the former columnist for The Guardian newspaper, said last week that more revelations about the NSA surveillance activities were coming. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
The Korean economy grew at its fastest pace in nearly 2 years in the third quarter of this year, bolstered by a recovery in consumer spending and a pickup in facility investment.
So, is this a sign that the Korean economy is breaking out of a low-growth trend? For the answer and more, we connect live to our Hwang Ji-hye at the Arirang News Center. So, Ji-hye, what did the third quarter growth look like?
Hello, Ganyang Daniel. The Bank of Korea said Friday that the nation's gross domestic product rose 3.3% in the July to September period from a year earlier, the first time that growth has topped 3% since the end of 2011. The economy grew 1.1% compared to the second quarter when it gained at the same pace. That is significant because the economy's quarter-on-quarter growth remained below 1% for more than 2 years until early this year. Perhaps even more noteworthy is the fact that the recovery largely came from a rise in facility investment and improving domestic demand. Facility investment rose 1.2% in the last quarter after a 0.2% fall in the April to June period. Private consumption rose 1.1%, quickening from a 0.7% gained in the second quarter. This is encouraging as the Korean economy relies heavily on exports and less so on domestic demand.
Now, Ji-hye, however, it's undeniable that the third quarter growth was actually also helped by government spending, which will run out later this year. So could this perhaps cause the Korean economy to fall short of the BOK's growth projection for this year and next?
Well, Korea's construction investment, mainly driven by government policies, as you said, rose 2.7%, serving as a major engine for the third quarter growth. Experts say, however, that the Korean economy will likely reach the central bank's growth projection of 3.8% next year, as the growth coming from government spending could be replaced by a recovery of the global economy next year.
As world economy turn around next year, I think Korea will maintain the export growth, will achieve like a 3.8 growth in 2014.
But Korea's exports dropped in the third quarter, Gia, so how can that be explained?
Daniel, the nation's exports, which account for half of the nation's GDP, as you said, dropped 0.9% from the previous quarter, following a 1.8% expansion in the second quarter. The central bank explained that the drop was the result of there being fewer working days in September due to the national holiday Chuseok. And while some say the recent trend of the strong won could hurt the nation's exports, experts aren't as sure.
Compared to the past, the foreign exchange rate has less of an impact on Korea's economy. That's because the nation's large companies that lead exports have spread their production facilities around the world.
So basically, the general consensus seems to be that the Korean economy is showing signs of escaping from the low growth trap, right?
Yes, Kanyang. Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok, in fact, has also said that if the Korean economy maintains its 1.1% growth in the fourth quarter, it could post a growth rate of 2.9% this year, which would exceed the Finance Ministry's earlier forecast of 2.7%. The central bank also said last week that economic performance in the third quarter is in line with its forecast of 2.8% growth for all of this year. Still, experts say that the U.S. budget standoff and the planned stimulus tapering could have a negative impact on the Korean economy next year.
Okay, thank you for helping us connect the dots on that topic, Hwang Ji-hye. That was our Hwang Ji-hye reporting live at the News Center.
And in line with Ji-hye's report, are Korean consumers finally opening up their wallets? They're definitely feeling more confident as the economy continues to steadily pick up steam. The numbers speak for themselves as the nation's consumer sentiment index hit a 17-month high in October. The Bank of Korea says the index came in at 106 this month, up 4 points from the previous month.
The index is an indicator of consumers' outlook on the economy, living conditions, and future spending, with a reading above 100 reflecting their confidence in the economy. The central bank said the record figure was largely due to a considerably low comparison base in September and the local economy being on the recovery track.
And the Korean government is determined not to let the local currency appreciate to a level that would threaten the nation's burgeoning economic recovery.
But some experts are wondering whether the government's actions could actually reverse the trend. Our Connie Kim reports.
A high-ranking official from the Ministry of Strategy and Finance says the strengthening of the won could potentially derail the Korean economy from its path to recovery. Speaking on condition of anonymity, he said last Wednesday's intervention in the foreign exchange market reflects the government's determination to stabilize the Korean currency. On Wednesday, when the won hit a 5-year high of 1,054 won against the dollar during intraday trading, officials from both the Bank of Korea and the Ministry of Strategy and Finance verbally intervened in the market to push the won lower to close above the psychologically important 1,060 level. Foreign investors have recently snapped up Korean stocks and bonds, which they see as a safe bet, promising a relatively high return, thereby pushing up the Korean currency. In the 3 months of September, the Korean won rose by 6.3%, the second highest margin of increase among currencies of all the G20 countries. Both Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok and Bank of Korea Governor Kim Jung-soo last week, reaffirming that the government will slow down the pace of the won's appreciation, said measures being considered include taxing foreigners investing in local bonds and requiring hedging against currency fluctuations. But many experts say such government steps may not be enough to stabilize the won given the foreign appetite for Korean stocks and global economic uncertainties, including the timing of the planned tapering of U.S. stimulus program. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, the iconic street leading up to Gwanghwamun in downtown Seoul is set to go car-free at least one day every week starting next year.
Officials say they hope to transform the area for pedestrians and festivals, with similar plans for other cultural districts across the city. Han Da-eun reports.
Gwanghwamun Plaza has been the place to be to experience some of Korea's biggest events in recent years, such as the opening of the 2002 World Cup. Gwanghwamun is one of the most recognizable landmarks in the capital city, with growing public demand to open up its roads for urban festivals and other events.
I wish there were a lot of places like Gwanghwamun Street where everyone could gather and have fun. It would be great if a lot of these public places were open so we could spend time with family and friends there.
In response, the Seoul metropolitan government will be closing the busy street off to traffic once every week starting next year. City officials say it's just the first step in making Seoul more pedestrian-friendly.
The walking street will operate every Sunday and then eventually be expanded to pedestrian-only streets once it gets more familiar. We're planning on establishing a framework on transforming Gwanghwamun Street into a walking paradise.
The car-free zone will cover some 12 vehicle lanes and stretch over 500 meters from the Gwanghwamun Palace gates to the Sejongno intersection. The city has been introducing more and more of these popular car-free days to other districts, from the youthful neighborhood of Hongdae to the cultural mecca of Itaewon. 37 car-free street events were held across the city this year alone, up 32% on year. The car-free streets are expected to become even more prevalent as they reduce traffic accidents, reduce greenhouse emissions, and promote the local tourism industry. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
And for the weather forecast, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Hello, Bo-kyung. So it was cold this morning, but we got some sunshine in the afternoon.
Yes, and it looks like the numbers will rise a couple of degrees tomorrow.
But I also hear that rain is on the way. Could you give us the details?
That's right, Daniel. Light passing showers are forecast in the central regions tomorrow afternoon. Now, there should be about a total of 5 millimeters of precipitation, so make sure to grab a small umbrella on your way out. Although tomorrow morning's figures are expected to drop, the big temperature gaps of about 10 to 15 degrees will continue, so make sure to dress accordingly. Taking a closer look at tomorrow's forecast, Seoul starts off the morning at 9 degrees before reaching 16 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, cities down south will hit the low 20s. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon drops to 5 degrees in the morning before reaching 19 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, Dokdo and Mangkumgang will peak at 19 and 12 degrees respectively. Well, that's all I have for you this hour. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Monday evening, and I'll be back with more updates after 8.
Thank you for that, Bo-kyung. And that does it for us. Thank you for watching. This is Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Gan-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you right back here same time tomorrow. Good night.